Hello, my name is Gustavo Ianelli. I'm the authorizations manager in digital technologies in Solvay. I work as part of the information security and compliance platform, and my team is responsible for authorizations management on many systems, including not only the part related to access management, but also the design of the accesses and authorizations related tools like related to identity management, GRC, and also NextLabs, which is going to be the topic of today's presentation. So I'm going to present here a very successful project in Solvay, which was the implementation of Zero Trust Data Security for SAP by using a product from NextLabs around regulatory compliance. About the agenda for today, we are going to speak a little bit about Solvay, then the export compliance context at Solvay, our solution approach, the solution implementation scope, the objectives of this implementation, part related to the enforcement of export compliance in SAP in more details, the project roadmap. Then we are going to do a few demonstrations about the functionality, how it works in the system, how it looks like. And finally, we will cover the two remaining sessions around value, benefits, improvements, and the conclusions and lessons learned. About Solvay, we are a chemical company from Belgium. We have 161 years of history, and we count with 4 different business units: soda ash, peroxides, special chemicals, and coatings. We are an essential chemicals company. We produce chemicals that are essential to our world, and we serve many different markets that you can see here, from agriculture, feed and food, automotive, building and construction, consumer goods and healthcare, electronics, industrial applications, resources, environment, and energy. In terms of some figures about Solvay, we are around 9,000 employees. We have 45 production sites in many different countries. We are present in 41 countries, and we have a net sales of 4.9 billion euro per year. These figures are from 2023. Now, speaking about export compliance at Solvay and the context. So the relationship with NextLabs, and so we started to study the NextLabs softwares back in 2016. So this was because at that time, in 2015, Solvay acquired a company called Cytec. And I was actually part of this project to implement authorizations and perform role to position mapping on this acquisition project. And when we started to do the design sessions and meet with the colleagues from Cytec, we discovered that they had very sensitive products, including ITAR products. Okay, and now I take the opportunity to explain a little bit what this is about, what is export compliance, and why we need to do this type of data segregation inside of our ERP systems. So taking ITAR, for example, this is a regulation about products that are used with military applications. And in this specific case, this regulation is from the US, and the government basically wants to protect, has access to this type of information based on different criteria, which the main one is about the citizenship of the person. Okay, so for example, in the case of ITAR, we have to allow the access only to American citizens, and we also had to implement, on that case, geolocation features to ensure that only allowed IP addresses were going to give access to the data. So the person had to be an American citizen, and also be connecting to the system into a white list of IPs. Otherwise, the person would be denied. Okay, and this is basically to avoid people that's traveling overseas to open information about this type of data. This is not the only regulation. There are many other regulations that we had to comply with, and we have to comply with until today. But this is where it all started, because by having to protect the systems with ITAR controls, we had really to improve our capabilities around data security in the systems. So this company, they were using many different systems. So they had 3 ERPs, if I'm not mistaken. And then we had to implement their systems in our landscape from Solvay. And by doing that, since we had all these sensitive products, we had to implement a product from NextLabs. Okay, and this is where it all started. And this is just to provide an overview of what we are talking about when we discuss about these export compliance controls, where this is coming from in Solvay, and also to say that there are many types of regulations from different countries with different criteria to allow the access to the data, but normally the citizenship being the main criteria to allow or deny access. Okay, so this is something that it's completely based on an attribute, right? Very different than what we have with standard SAP authorizations, with roles, authorization objects. So we never had a requirement like that. And then we have decided to study possible options and what would be the best solution for Solvay in order to comply with these regulations. Now, talking a little bit about the scope and also the context around export compliance in Solvay, our implementation was really focused on protecting data around products, right? So basically, what is the information that could be used to produce a certain product. So, for example, the bill of material, production routing, production recipes, EH&S composition. So everything that can tell you how to produce a certain product, we had to protect this type of information. And finally, this has impacted many different SAP modules, from production planning, EH&S, controlling, quality management, and inventory management. So these were all the modules that have been impacted, because even though the core is related to manufacturing, there are many transactions from different modules that you can also access what is the composition of a product, and how this product is produced. So there are many overlaps, right, in SAP, and finally we have impacted these different modules. Giving a little bit of context on our projects. So as I mentioned previously, everything started with this acquisition from Cytec. So we acquired this company back in 2015, and then we launched different projects to deploy and to migrate their systems into ours. And the first one was the implementation of dynamic authorization management for the business unit composite materials, which happened between 2018 and 2019. And this was our first experience implementing a product from NextLabs. And then later on, more recent, and this is where it's going to be the focus of this presentation, we have implemented the DAE, Data Access Enforcer, between 2022 and 2023 for more business units, specialty polymers, Novecare Technology Solutions, and Special Chem. So now, speaking about the approach and the solution. So NextLabs is a solution that helps us providing new capabilities around data masking and data filtering that cannot be achieved by using standard SAP authorizations, functionalities that we are already running in our systems. And everything happens dynamically. This is really important to highlight. So we don't rely on role assignment to perform these actions. The policies, they are called according to the access attempts of people. So as the users try to access the data, all the checks, they happen dynamically. I'm going to explore more about the solution in the other slides and explain a little bit in more detail how it's going to work. The system is also possible to integrate with ECC, S4, BW for HANA. In our case, we have implemented DAM initially in ECC and BW, and later on we have implemented DAE into ECC systems. And I'm also going to explore more about our different implementations, especially the one related to DAE. That's the most recent one. Also very important to say that once you determine a policy in DAE, you don't need to code, you don't need to implement coding in the backend systems. This only happens if you are implementing a DAM interception. I'm going to speak more about it later on, but there is no coding when you determine a policy in DAE. So once you determine the policy in the policy controller, this is going to automatically impact that data object in the backend systems, okay, and in many different ways. And as I describe it, I will explain a little bit more later. Finally, very important to tell that in these components from NextLabs, like the policy controller, you have reportings, you have logs, so you're able to see everything that's happening in terms of the decisions that the policy controller is taking, who is trying to access the data. So you have a cockpit to analyze the data, extract reports, and also get some insights on how your system is being used. Now, still on the approach and solution, I will describe here this diagram. That's the architecture of the solution. And here, let's start here with the access attempt in the left side. So any user trying to access information, let's take, for example, in ECC, imagine a user trying to access some protected view of material because of some regulatory compliance reason. And then what happens is that the behavior of the system, it will depend on whether the policy enforcement is done through data access enforcer or dynamic authorization management. And here I take the opportunity to explain the difference between the two. Okay, so in DAM, what we implemented back in 2018 and 2019, you need to have what we call an interception inside of the object that you are trying to protect. So for example, let's take CS03, the display view of material transaction in SAP. In order to have a protection through DAM, you need to have an interception in the code, in the program, okay? It's not complex at all, but you need to add a few lines of code in your program in order to call NextLabs, right? This is through DAM. In DAE, on the other hand, you don't need to implement any interception because you have, let's say, a single interception in the system as a whole. It's between the system and the database. So this is fully transparent. Once the system is installed, and this is all out of the box, okay? Every time that you are trying to access some data that you declared that you want to protect, this database interception will be triggered automatically, and this is fully transparent. So in DAE, you don't need to go and put an interception in the programs. Once DAE is installed, you only need to work in the control center to determine your policies. Okay, so this is the big difference here. In the AM, you also need to work with the policies, but you need to put in place these interceptions. Okay, and both solutions, they work together. In some scenarios, the DAE will cover 100%, but you may find some exceptions that the AM could be a better option. In our case, particularly speaking, I believe we can tell that more than 99% of the scenarios, they were covered with DAE in our last implementation. In our first implementation, it was fully DAM because DAE didn't exist. Okay, so just to explain a little bit the difference here. And okay, what happens here? So let's imagine that we are talking about view of material, as I said, and let's say that this is this has control data that we declared in the control center. So this is going to generate a request to the policy engine, the policy controller, that will then call the control center. And in the control center, you have all the policies that will take these requests that are coming from the ERP or any system, any access attempt, cross-check the information with the user attributes, whether coming from SuccessFactors or Active Directory or any type of integration that you have with your user information, and finally take a decision. Okay, and then of course, each company will have a different scenario, and I will explore more on what we did for Solvay in the next slides. But overall, this is how it works. And as I said, everything works dynamically. You don't need to think about any manual assignments, roles, and so forth. So it's really an extra layer that will enhance and improve your data security overall. Okay. Now, a little bit about the context of the implementation that we did in Solvay. So this last project, we had two big ACC ERPs that were running for decades and with thousands of users. Okay. So basically, on this second project, we were implementing the two main SAP systems from Solvay. In these systems, we have several users from multiple citizenships, sometimes with data browsing transactions and other technical transactions like SE16, SQVI. So all these transactions that they don't have an authority check on organizational levels, that they are really, really technical and really, really tricky to secure. Okay, so we do have global teams across all our shared services organizations. So not only in IT, but also we have different service centers worldwide performing administrative functions. And these people, sometimes they may have some broad access or even access to technical transactions. And inside of IT, we have a big level of outsourcing in India. So for sure, this was also a concern because of having pretty much almost all the first level SAP support outsourced in India. Then, of course, if you put in place a solution that is blocking much more than needed, for example, we could have a big impact in our IT operations. So this was definitely a concern. And finally, another point that was important for this the context, thousands of users with access to queries and other data browsing transactions. So this is also important. So there are several business users running SQ00 queries. And of course, this type of queries, they are touching data and they could be touching control data as well. Now, talking about the objectives of our implementation. So, of course, the main objective was to secure our data. So, to implement these controls by using NextLabs in order to enhance our data protection features and put a much more robust system in place, and also do this dynamically, right? So along with the business objective that was completely compliance oriented, we also had some important objectives, whether in terms of goals that we had for our organization, or cost related, or even IT oriented objectives on the maintenance of the solution. Okay, so I will describe a little bit some of these objectives. So, for example, first one, we didn't want to have any changes in our organization because of the control data, right? So as I said, we have a lot of our first level SAP support outsourced in India. We didn't want, for example, to hire people from citizenships from different locations or create new contracts because of that, due to the export compliance regulations, right? So we wanted to implement something that would allow us to stick with the same organization that we had in place. Another very important point is that we definitely needed to have a cost-efficient project to implement. And why am I stressing this point? Because when we implemented DAM, for example, back in 2018 and 2019, DAE didn't exist at that time, right? So we had to implement interceptions on every transaction that we wanted to control. And taking the context, and it was a greenfield implementation on that specific scenario as part of that project. Taking the context of this last project that we had to implement on these big systems that were running for decades with several people with access to technical transactions, it would be very expensive to implement a solution, whether DAM or other solutions from the market, that would require an action in each object, in each transaction, in each program, in each table. So for this, it was definitely very important to rely on DAE because, as I mentioned, DAE takes a different approach. You don't need to look at each object and take action in each object to protect the information. So this was definitely a very important point to consider that is related to the cost of the project itself. Then we have, of course, a low maintenance solution. We didn't want to implement a solution that after the go live, we had to allocate many people to maintain it. So we wanted to have as low maintenance as possible. low level of developments and customizations. Of course, that the more developments, the more you customize, the more expensive and difficult to maintain is later on, right? We wanted also to have a attribute-based solution that would be dynamic without relying on SAP roles, no user access review, no authorization objects, no manual mistakes of someone assigning a certain role to a certain user. So we really wanted to have a dynamic attribute-based solution because this is definitely way more accurate, right? And way more secure to have it. And we had the experience with DAM, right, that we implemented in the other project, and it was a very good experience. And we wanted to apply the same approach in this new implementation. Then, of course, we needed to have a very robust solution without backdoors that would allow us to secure administrative users, data browsing transactions, queries, all of that, everything that we know that's very tricky to secure. We wanted to be sure that we didn't have any types of backdoors. And finally, last but not least, no performance deterioration. And this is a very important topic because when you are implementing controls and transactions that are run 1,000 times per day or even more, or tables that are being accessed by many different transactions at the same time, for sure, performance is a huge concern. So we knew how we would be impacting core business processes in Solvay by implementing this solution or any type of solution. So one of the top concerns was also around performance. We didn't want to impact the user experience in a negative way. Okay, now about the small diagram here about our implementation itself, okay, how it's working in Solvay for DAE. So what we have here, just an example, end user accessing CS03, display bill of material. And then what we have, the objects behind CS03, for example, the bill of material, line item, table, and the fields, they are considered protected. So what happens when someone is trying to access the bill of material? NextLabs is going to be called because remember, I have here NextLabs DAE installed in the system. So there is this single database interception that is transparent for everyone that is checking the information that is being retrieved by the application from the database. And I have declared in the policy controller that I wanted to control the table as TPO, that is the line item table for the bill of materials and certain fields in this table. Okay, so basically SAP, the system knows that this is control data. So when the user is running CS03 and trying to access a bill of material, what's going to happen? There's going to be first a check on the materials. So basically to understand if this bill of material is from a controlled product or not. So we have all the information here about what's the level of classification according to the export compliance regulations of each material. And in our case, this is being, how can I say, the governance around this is done through MDG, SAP MDG. And we have the data stewards that are maintaining this information in MDG. And then this information is being sent to an internal table in the ECC system. So let's consider that this is a controlled material. What's going to happen? Then there's going to be a communication with the policy controller and finally the control center. And then in the control center, remember the control center is orchestrating everything. You have the policies and the policies that will have the logic to whether deny or grant access to the data. So here, the information coming to the control center will be, in our case, the material and the material code, not the code, sorry, but the material classification that the user is trying to access. So for example, let's say this user is trying to access an European dual-use material. There will be a classification for this material, and this information will be sent to the policy controller. Then what the policy controller will do, we have an API that is connected with what we call the access flag tool. So we have a software here that's calculating the level of clearance of the users according to the information from success factors from the HR system. So what is happening here? Every time someone is attempting to access control data, the information is sent to the control center. The control center is going to cross-check the information that's being sent with the user attributes, and finally take a decision whether the user is allowed or not to access the information. So this information is sent back to SAP, and then the user will be able to enter in the bill of material of the product. Now, about the roadmap of the project, we started back in the Q2 of 2021 by performing a proof of concept with NextLabs DAE and a competitor. That time, DAE was really new when we started this discussion. We had a very positive experience with NextLabs with the DAM implementation that at that point it was already running for more than 3 years. And but we knew, for the reasons I mentioned, that DAM would be really costly to implement in our requirements. So we definitely started to look to an alternative that would be more efficient to implement in our new context. So we did this proof of concept. Finally, DAE was able to meet all the requirements that we had in this proof of concept. Then in November 2021, we did the kickoff of the project. After that, between Q1 and Q2, we worked in parallel between all the infrastructure setup. That was actually quite demanding because we had to implement high availability in order to have the availability of the NextLabs servers in the same level of the availability of the ERP, because we were touching key processes. So we had to ensure that if one server failed, we had a backup that would be activated in real time in the same moment. And this, of course, was demanding all this infrastructure setup. It was not because of NextLabs, but mainly our internal processes to set up all this new infrastructure. So in parallel of this infrastructure setup installation, we were also working in the policy design and mapping. That was basically to understand what were the fields that we wanted to protect, the tables that we wanted to protect, and also the test scenarios that we wanted to execute to ensure that everything was working properly. So then between July and September, in Q3 2022, we deployed the policies in the test environment and started to perform tests. Then in the end, we went live with the first sprint in December 2022, and the last sprint, the sprint 2, in February 2023, right? And then after that, we had all the scenarios fully implemented, which involved more than 100 tables. So it was really a big scope. We have impacted hundreds and hundreds of transactions, tables, programs. So it was definitely a huge implementation, and in my opinion, in a very short time frame, especially considering that 6 months of the project was mainly to set up the infrastructure. Okay. Now in the next slide, we are going to do a small demo on the solution, okay, and with a few scenarios around SE16, bill of material, and EHS composition. So now I'm going to show in the ECC system how NextLabs is protecting the information on a few different scenarios. First one I will show is about the CS03 transaction. It's display bill of material. So here I'm trying to access a bill of material from a product under Chinese regulation that I don't have access due to my citizenship. So if I try to enter, you'll see that there is a message because nothing is coming from the database because of the database interception that's done by DAE. And then you have the message here: control data has been filtered out. Click here for more information. This was a a message that we created for this type of situation. And then you can customize the content of the message. You can write whatever you want. In our case, we are basically explaining what's happening and why, and having the link to a knowledge base article in our ITSM solution. Okay. Now, still on the context of bill of material, I just want to show what for me is really impressive about this solution. That is the capability that once you declare that you want to protect a certain table and certain fields, it will impact not only the transactions, but also if you try to access the table data. So for example, if we take this material that I just described, this is the material master data transaction, the material is here. Then if I go to the intermediate table to get the bill of material code, here I have the bill of material code, and I'm going to add the bill of material code inside the table that has the line items of the bill of material. That is exactly what we want to protect here. And if I try to access it, see, I have the same error message as I had when using CS03. Control data has been filtered out. Click here for more information. So even when I try to access the data through the table directly, I'm also blocked because the AE is intercepting all the calls around this data when the application is fetching the information from the database. Okay. Now, another scenario that I want to show is related to HNS, to access two different product compositions, one that I have access and the other one that I don't. So for example, going here to CGO2, entering substance. If I try to access this composition, which is under a regulation that I have access, I have the specification here. If I double click, then I'm able to deep dive in all the information about this this product, all the chemistry information on this specific product. And then if I try to access another product here, another substance that is under a regulation that I don't have access, again, no data found because the interception is filtering the information in a database level. And then I have the same error message as before, telling that control data has been filtered out. Okay. So these are the two scenarios that I wanted to describe. That one related to the bill of materials, and the other one related to the HNS composition. That are scenarios that we are using in our implementation. So now, coming back from the demo, I want to speak a little bit about the values and benefits of this project. As I mentioned, the project was really compliance oriented, but we were definitely able to achieve all the compliance goals, fully achieve all the goals, plus all the other goals that I have described more on the organizational standpoint and also in the IT concerns, maintenance, and so forth. So more than 100 tables were impacted with our policies, and 14,000 users in both ERPs. The API for policy decision is being called on average 2.4 million times per year, meaning that we are having the system being used a lot, and without any impact on performance. Okay, so this is also really important. Even though the system is being called on that volume, we are with a very stable solution. We didn't have to hire or change the organization due to people's citizenship, because we have implemented this control that is really happening only on the controlled materials in a dynamic way. So we didn't have to perform any organizational change due to these requirements. The data browsing transactions, they were fully secured automatically with the NextLabs data filtering. We were able to secure all the tricky scenarios with SC16, SQ00, all of that. As I described it, as soon as you declare that a table in the field needs to be controlled by DAE, it will impact everything system-wide, right? So we were able to to secure all these very tricky scenarios that we were worried about. From an IT standpoint, as I mentioned, no role assignments, no access request, no user access review, everything's dynamic based on the attributes. The solution is really stable, so we don't have technical issues in the policies on the way the solution is working. And most of the issues that we find, they are normally because of data that is not part of the software itself. It's whether because a material needs to be classified with a different export compliance context, or there is a user that for some reason didn't receive the appropriate classification in HR system. So everything that happens in the middle, in the application itself, is really stable. Another very important point as an IT manager is that I didn't have to hire anyone to maintain this solution. I could incorporate these activities in the application owner from DAM, from the previous implementation, because the solution is really low maintenance. So we don't have something that requires a new hiring only to maintain the AE, even in our context that the solution is being called 2.4 million times per year. So this is really positive, and I can say that right now, probably it's taking around 0.25% of the time of one person to maintain both DAM and DAE. Okay, so it's really low maintenance. Everything happens dynamically, and the solution is quite stable. So in the end, we don't need to put a lot of effort to maintain it. Zero complaints about performance issues. I already mentioned a lot about this, and really, really important to stress that we don't have performance issues, even though the solution is being called every moment. And finally, the cost efficiency concern. As I say, with DAE, once you declare something that needs to be controlled, it will impact the system in a very broad approach, right? So you say, I want to control this table and these fields, and then if the users are accessing through transaction A, transaction B, table, program, it will be controlled, okay? And this is very important because this enabled us to make cost efficient projects, and also on the sustainability of the solution for sure, right? Now, there's something else I would like to share about new techniques and improvements. So after we completed the implementation, as I mentioned, we had the go live in 2023, and then this year, a few months ago, in 2024, there was a new requirement around some a product that was sensitive around competitors that were using the same system and using the same organizational levels in SAP. And we had to segregate the data in order to avoid antitrust issues, right? So we couldn't have competitors having access to the same type of information. So the way we achieved that was to implement the material classification and use DAE as the engine also to control this type of data. And what's important to tell is that it took less than 2 months. Okay, so we had this requirement. It was an important requirement for our businesses, and we were able to deploy in our test environments really quickly and finally have a workable solution with very low effort and very low cost in less than 2 months in our productive systems. Okay, so this is also really important to tell that it's not difficult to implement new policies, to implement new features. Now about the conclusions and lessons learned. So NextLabs is a great asset in Solvay. So it's helping us to comply with regulations, protect our reputation, and also being a system that's aligned with our digital approach. Everything's dynamic, automatic, low maintenance, effective. So it's really a solution that is adding a lot of value to Solvay on many different aspects. One important advice that I give is that the data part is definitely key, right? So it doesn't matter how good is the software that you buy to protect the data, like we have NextLabs DAE, which is a great software. but it doesn't matter if you have a great software and you don't have good data and good data governance, right? So if your material classification process is not good enough, or you don't have a governance around that, or you don't have very good subject data, the data from your organization, the people with the citizenship. So everything that happens around the AE in terms of data needs to be in very good shape in terms of operational procedures and governance. Okay, a lot of governance, especially when you are if you have an implementation that is around compliance. So this is definitely key. In our case, we were in a good shape. We had to improve some points for sure during the project. We both projects actually, not only the one now from 2022 2023, but also our implementation back in 2018. We were in a good shape, but we had to definitely touch these points, ensure that everything was in a good shape in terms of data classification, both for the people and for the materials, right? So this is really important. And I just also want to say a big thank you to NextLabs and to Kang, because we started this project in the first release of the AE. And of course, the first release was not perfect. We faced some issues, but we worked as a team. So NextLabs really supported us all the way through with the needed actions to ensure that we would meet our project timeline, and that our project would be successful. So in the end, faced some problems in the beginning. As I said, the product was really new, and we knew that. Okay, we knew since the proof of concept that we were implementing a new product. But the collaboration has been great. So both the NextLabs and the Solvay teams worked together, and I really want to say a big thank you, because this project was a big success, as I said, not only in the compliance end, but also on an IT standpoint. I also want to take the opportunity, still on the sense to say how good the collaboration of the teams happened between Solvay and NextLabs. We actually got an award. So Solvay has a digital technology awards that happens every year to determine what are the best projects that happened in the previous year. So in this year, in 2024, we won the Solvay DT Awards in the first place in the category of innovation and business value with this project. And as I say, big thank you to NextLabs. These awards are a consequence of the right software being deployed by the right teams from Solvay and NextLabs. So this is it. I want to say thank you. This was definitely a very important project for Solvay. I want to really say thank you for having the opportunity and your time to share this experience. And I hope that this was a good presentation, that you learned a little bit about what we did and how this solution is adding value to our business, and also how this was implemented in our business requirements. So thank you very much for your time. Bye-bye.